Welcome to the Profit by Design podcast. I am Melissa Kay, the lead strategist at Tap the Potential, and also joining me is Dr. Sabrina Starling, the business psychologist, the founder of Tap the Potential, and TEDx speaker. We are excited to support you today with feeling overwhelmed and understaffed, and help you take control when you just feel like you're responsible for too much, which I feel like almost every business owner could say. What do you think, Dr. Sabrina?
Oh my gosh, that is like the experience of being a business owner is overwhelmed and understaffed. And so much so, Melissa, that I remember a client that I had years ago, and every meeting they would come to, they would talk about, well, we can't do this right now because we're understaffed. And after about 4 months of that, I said, do you realize like that's going to be the nature of your business? And if you put off doing things because you're understaffed, nothing's ever going to get done. And that was kind of like, oh, it was like the deer in the headlights, like, oh, she's right. And so this is business, and there's nothing wrong with you if you are understaffed and overwhelmed. That's part of a growing business. That's the tension that we live in. So it's not something you're doing wrong as a business owner. And we are going to talk today, Melissa, about how to get out of that.
Yeah, I think it's something that we all go through, and the thing to really focus on is the right staff. So, Dr. Sabrina, take this from like high level top up. So if as a business owner tuning in right now, where do we even start when we know there's way too much on our plate, and that we've got all these balls that we're juggling in the air? We need more people. Do we really need more people? What's our first step?
No. And I have to explain why Melissa and I are laughing, because I am so grateful for where we are right now as a team at Tap the Potential. And her question kind of almost is a traumatic question for me, because it sends me back to where we were 5 or 6 years ago. I think I don't want to go there in my head. It's painful. And so taking it from the high level, like, where do we start? For me, I had to start with myself first. Mm-hmm. And that meant being honest about where I'm really spending my time and what is not valuable to moving the company forward in what I'm doing. There's things that have to be done, and we may not be the best people. Often we business owners are not the best people to be doing them. And so for me, my very first awareness was, I just need a virtual assistant. I need somebody who will take some of the calendaring and the email and the things off of my plate, where a lot of my time was being consumed. So that's where I started, and it felt really good to delegate, until it got to the point that I had delegated so much to my virtual assistant, who, by the way, Donna, is still with us over 15 or 16 years. She's been with us a long time. When you have an A player on your team, you delegate to that A player, and they say yes, and they take on more and more. And that was Donna's mode of operation. She would always say yes, and then she'd say, but I really don't want to do this long term, or, this isn't what I'll do it for now until you find someone else. And so she and I both ended up being overloaded. And so that's part of this process, is paying attention to, as you add team members, that the people who've been with you the longest probably need to have more things coming off their plate too. So it's not just the business owner that is being impacted. It's usually happening across the team. And this is where I really became aware of those $10,000 an hour activities, and looking at what's the highest and best use of my time. And over the years, I've had people ask me, how do you define the $10,000 an hour work? And I have not had a really solid definition until just recently. It's kind of come together. And so what I say at this point around $10,000 an hour activities is when we're working from our strengths and we are adding value because we're making other things easier or unnecessary for ourselves or for others. So let that sink in. So Melissa came in to Tap the Potential as my executive assistant years ago. And she had never been an executive assistant before. And she started reading a book on how to be an executive assistant. And I read the same book. And then Melissa started looking at, how do I take more things off of Dr. Sabrina? How do we simplify things? How do we clean up her calendar? So that's an example of $10,000 an hour activity right there, because of the questions Melissa was asking. Like, how do we simplify Dr. Sabrina's calendar? How do we get more off of her? And then as she started looking, she found meetings I didn't need to be in. She saw, there's ways to consolidate things and make it simpler. And so that made everything else, not just for me, but for our whole team, easier. So that's where a $10,000 an hour activity comes in. So to Melissa's point earlier about the importance of having good team members, A players on your team, if you don't have A players, you won't delegate to them, because you won't trust them. You won't trust them to think on their own. And so you end up hanging on to all of these tasks and activities. And really, we need to delegate. If it's not a $10,000 an hour activity, it's not from our strengths, and we're not adding value by making things easier or unnecessary, it either needs to stop happening, period, or somebody else who has that strength needs to take it on.
Yes. I love your story. And one thing that comes to mind is something that Donna shared. And Donna is just so wise, and she was so wise to share this with you. You don't want unicorns on your team. So Dr. Sabrina, I could do pretty much any role at Tap the Potential, but should I?
No.
And the answer is absolutely not. You want to bring people in and help them identify their strengths and keep them working in that area, in their zone of genius, the things that energize them the most, where they provide the most value. And that's highly important. And supporting your team members to really continue to look at that, right? So
Absolutely.
Just recently, was it last week, I believe I said to you, well, I can't believe you've been doing all of these tasks around the podcast. Like, you plan the podcast, you do the podcast, and then you submit the podcast. And this is so much time involved that other team members should be doing. After you did it, then it became me. And I've already identified in the last couple of months, why am I submitting the podcast? And those are activities, the time it takes me to submit the podcast, another team member could do it, and I could just record another podcast.
Exactly.
So have your team members look for efficiencies.
Yeah. And that's really the value of delegating, taking something off your plate and letting someone else do it, because that other person coming in will see ways to make it easier. My very first experience with this was when I was a freshman in college. I worked as an assistant, like a student assistant at a human resources department. And I replaced another student assistant, and she was like chief A player. Like, everyone loved her. And, when I came in, they were like, "Oh, we miss her so much. We hope you'll be good." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have these huge shoes to fill." And when I started following her processes, I was like, these are really kind of convoluted. And probably they became convoluted because she started in a role, and then the role just evolved like everything does. It evolved and became bigger. And so when I came in and they had told me like what they really needed me to do, I said, well, I have 10 steps here, but it looks like I could just do step 8 and this would accomplish, and then I could do steps 9 and 10. And they're like, yeah, I think so. I don't think you need to do 1 through 7. So it's just the experience of someone who's coming in with an outsider's perspective and who's not in the weeds doing it all the time, that can see like, oh my gosh, there's so many ways this can be simplified.
Okay, there's something that's resonating with me. 3 words. I want to share some context. As we were about to record this podcast episode, I said to you, Dr. Sabrina, you make my life easier. And you laughed. You said, Melissa, you make my life easier. Here's the thing. Ask for help. Asking for help is so powerful. And even if you think your team member's plate is overloaded or this person doesn't have time, always ask them for help and give them the opportunity to be a blessing to you and to one another on the team.
Yeah. Well, I chuckled when you said that because that's an epiphany. Both of us were like, you make my life easier. No, you make my life easier. And I kind of thought, well, how can that be? But just as we're talking about this, I'm realizing, well, Melissa's working from her strengths, which are different than my strengths. And so she's making my life easier because she's working from her strengths. I am working from my strengths, which are different from Melissa's. And that's how I'm making Melissa's life easier.
Yes, absolutely. So one thing that I want to make sure that our listeners understand is when you are looking to hire team members, when you're understaffed, or a lot of times what happens is business owners will look at reshuffling current roles. Well, I can move this person over here and I can move this person over there. It's very important to establish an accountability chart for your company and clearly define the roles that the company needs, and not actively seek to create roles around people's strengths. So can you dial that home for us?
Absolutely. When we have A players on the team, we're always thinking about like, well, I can plug them in here and I can plug them in there. And we really need to take this. The business exists to serve the people in it. And as leaders, our job is to set the business up for success, to serve the people in the business, the team members and the clients and customers who are impacted by the business. And so when we start making decisions, like an example that comes up over and over with clients is they will have a long-standing team member who's been with them since the beginning. And that team member is loyal and has had their back and has helped them through tough times. And yet they don't have the skill set needed for where the business is headed. And so the business owner keeps trying to move that team member around. Well, I'm going to try them over here in this role, and maybe they'll fit and they'll be happy again and energized and quit rolling their eyes at my new initiatives or whatever. and that is like this thing that never works out, and it drains energy, and it's painful for us because we see it happening. And sometimes it's almost like the business owner has to hit their head against the wall 10 times with us commenting, oh, you're hitting your head against the wall. There you go again. You're hitting your head against the wall. And finally, on the 10th time, it's like, oh yeah, I really should stop hitting my head against the wall. Like, this team member does not fit anymore for where the business is headed. And so when we start from, what does the business need? What is our vision? What is the sweet spot of this business that we're going to grow? And if we want to grow it 3x or 10x, what roles does the business need at that point for that sweet spot to grow by 10 times over the next 3 to 5 years? And then we look at, okay, these are the roles that are needed. We want to define the clear result that's needed from each role to serve the sweet spot and drive profitability. And then we step back from that and we say, what strengths are needed to deliver this result, this one result, exceptionally well day in and day out? And that starts to define who we're looking for to fill that role. So if that role is a creative role that needs somebody who's got a lot of ideas and just enjoys exploring things, you don't put a task type in there because the task type is going to do step 1, step 2, step 3, and there's not going to be creativity happening.
Mhm.
And so you're always coming from the perspective of what does the business need the most?
Yes. And with the right A player in place in the role, that A player is going to innovate.
Yes.
And then the magic is just going to happen. So can you speak to a time where you really had someone in a role that just wasn't working out and it was just consistent? Maybe you had multiple people in that role and then you had the right person and then the magic has just happened.
So, apologize. Do you hear the dog noise, Melissa?
I hear the dog, but I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
He's decided to start singing during our podcast. So
Lovely. We will invite you on in.
okay. So I think probably the easiest example to think of around this is the executive assistant role, because this was a role that Donna had been carrying in addition to everything she was doing as a virtual assistant on our team. So Donna had moved when she started with me. I hired her to take exceptional care of our clients. And I wanted her communicating with people around scheduling and just sharing tidbits with me about them so that when I showed up to coach them, I would know them. And this is Donna, like to a T. She's really good at all those things. Well, but then she also needed to do the newsletter and yada, yada, yada. And then my email and all the things. And so we had created our first 100-day process for our clients. Donna became the client concierge, and she was like, this is the best ever. But then we still needed somebody to manage my calendar and email. And it was too much for Donna. And so that's when I looked at, and I did the same thing all business owners do. I really don't want to hire another person. Our team is really good the way it is. I don't want to, what if they mess it up? All those thoughts. And then finally, I started looking for an executive assistant, and Melissa was recommended by Amy on our team. And Melissa came in and took these things off of Donna. It allowed Donna to really flourish in what she's doing now. And we just have, I'm going to brag on us. In the last 3 weeks, 3 weeks, we've renewed 5 clients. In the last 6 weeks, we've renewed 6 clients. So we are 6 for 6. Everybody who was up for renewal has renewed. And that speaks to our service delivery. Melissa obviously does a lot of the service, but do you know who makes Melissa look good? It's Donna. Donna's managing all the behind the scenes to make sure our clients have what they need. When they have questions, they're reaching out to her. Donna is the one who watches Melissa's messaging and emails to make sure that Melissa can be off on Friday, recharging, doing her things. And then if there's something is needed, Donna's the one who gets Melissa's attention. But otherwise, Melissa can unplug on that. And that's really when you take somebody, Donna did not like calendaring. I mean, she does it, but it's not like that doesn't light her up. She really did not like being in my email. I'm not sure anybody likes being in my email, quite honestly, but maybe Heather likes it. It allowed Donna to flourish. Melissa came in, Melissa didn't stay in this role. Melissa moved on to other things, but it allowed the role to be streamlined and made simpler. And now Heather does a phenomenal job in this role. And I'm going to brag on Heather. One of the things she does is my personal email has exploded with all the stuff that I'm managing in my personal life these days. And I don't have time to get through all my email. I used to be able to, a few months ago, I could do my email in 20 minutes twice a week. It's not that anymore because of my personal life. And I can't even get to it, but Heather will send me a text message and she'll say, here are the important things that have shown up in your email today. So I don't have to go through, and she's already filtered my email. So I don't have to go through what she's filtered. I can just go straight to those messages, the subject line, get what I need, respond, and move on. And so that allows me, like if I have to spend 3 hours on a Friday dealing with my personal email, I can do that. I don't have to stop everything and deal with those things. So that is where having the right people makes the biggest difference.
It is. I couldn't do life without Donna and Heather. I mean, that's how much of an impact. I cannot imagine my role. They both have our backs.
Yep.
That's key. That's key. So that said, how do you delegate without micromanaging? So you found the right people, you have team members. How do you just set them loose, Dr. Sabrina, without micromanaging every little thing that they do? You do that so beautifully.
I think that's a cliffhanger, Melissa. Our timer went off.
Well, maybe that will be our next podcast episode, delegating without micromanaging.
I think so.
Okay. Well, we're going to leave it as a cliffhanger. Thank you so much we're just laughing because this is new and funny. And we could just talk all day. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the Profit by Design podcast.
Bye for now.
Bye.